Welcome back to Quarter Dollar, the place where hidden treasures from your pocket change come alive. Some quarters that look ordinary at first glance can actually be worth life-changing money. Not just hundreds, not just thousands, but in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars. These coins carry history, mistakes, and secrets that most people never notice, but collectors pay insane amounts to own them. Today, we're uncovering the top 10 most valuable quarter dollars. And trust me, you'll want to check your old coin jars after this. If you love uncovering coin secrets and rare finds, make sure to subscribe here and also check out my second channel, US Mint Mysteries, where we dig even deeper into the stories behind America's rarest coins. Hit that subscribe button on both channels so you don't miss a single discovery. I've dropped the link to US Mint Mysteries in the first comment below. Washington Quarter. And once again, this is a coin that most people would dismiss at first sight. In circulated condition, the surfaces are grey and worn down from decades of use. Washington's profile looks soft, the details in his hair are faded, and the eagle on the reverse side has lost most of its sharp lines. There's no mint mark anywhere, which might make it look even less interesting to the untrained eye. But here's where things get fascinating. The year 1966 hides secrets that can turn an ordinary quarter into a shocking payday. The US Mint was still in transition from silver to clad coinage during this year. Just like 1965, collectors searched the 1966 quarters closely for rare mistakes. Some 1966 quarters were struck on leftover silver planchets. And if you ever find one of those, even in circulated condition, the value can leap into the thousands. A standard 1966 clad quarter in worn condition might only be worth its face value, but a silver transitional error can easily sell for $5,000 to $8,000, even if it's been in pockets and purses for half a century. Higher grade examples have reached the unbelievable range of $20,000 to $30,000 at auction. But the surprises don't stop there. The 1966 quarters also have dramatic minting errors that collectors crave. Off-center strikes, double dies, and even coins struck on the wrong planchets have been recorded. Imagine finding a 1966 quarter with a bold double die obverse, where Washington's profile and lettering show clear doubling. Such coins can command anywhere from $1,000 to $15,000, depending on condition. And if you happen to stumble across one of the extremely rare wrong planchet errors, like a quarter struck on a dime planchet, values have reached as high as $50,000. That's the kind of jaw-dropping discovery that turns pocket change into treasure. Even more exciting is the fact that none of these coins from 1965 to 1967 carry mint marks. The mint intentionally left there off during those years to discourage hoarding during the silver transition. So when you look at a 1966 quarter, you're holding a piece of that history. A coin that represents the government's effort to keep change circulating while silver was disappearing. That lack of mint mark, which might look boring at first, is actually a sign of one of the most unique periods in US coinage history. So yes, a 1966 quarter in this circulated condition might not look like much at first glance, but the thrill lies in the possibility. Could this plain-looking coin actually be one of the rare transitional silver errors? Could it hide a dramatic double die? Every time you check a 1966 quarter, you're stepping into a treasure hunt. And that's what makes it so exciting. Some people still can't believe that a coin they've handled dozens of times in their lifetime could carry a hidden value that climbs into the 5 figures. And that is the magic of the 1966 Washington quarter. Next up, we land in 1980 with the Washington quarter struck at the Denver Mint. At first glance, this faded circulated example looks like just another everyday quarter. The luster is long gone. Washington's hair details have softened almost to nothing, and the eagle on the reverse is flat from years of heavy use. You can barely make out the small D mint mark just beside Washington's ponytail. And most people wouldn't give it a second thought. But here's where things get surprising. 1980 quarters, especially from Denver, hide values and stories that can shock even long-time collectors. By this year, the copper-nickel-clad composition was well established, but the mint was producing billions of coins, and with mass production came mistakes. Some 1980 D quarters carry bold double-die errors, especially on the motto, "In God We Trust," and the date, even in heavily circulated condition. Such coins can bring in $500 to $1,000. In higher grades, the price jumps quickly into the $5,000 range. And then there are off-center strikes from 1980 D. Dramatic ones where part of the design is missing can reach values of $2,000 to $8,000, depending on just how far off-center the strike is. But what really shocks collectors are the rare wrong planchet errors. Imagine a 1980 D quarter struck not on a quarter blank at all, but on a smaller dime planchet or even a foreign coin blank. These unusual errors can fetch tens of thousands of dollars. In fact, one 1980 D Washington quarter struck on a foreign planchet stunned collectors when it sold for over $40,000 at auction. And for those lucky enough to own a pristine mint state 1980 D with strong strike and no wear, top-graded examples have brought in staggering figures, crossing into the $20,000 to $30,000 range. That's an unbelievable jump from what looks like an ordinary coin in your change. The design itself is classic. John Flanagan's portrait of George Washington on the obverse and the heraldic eagle on the reverse. By 1980, people were so used to seeing this design that they hardly noticed it anymore. And that's exactly why these coins are so dangerous to overlook. They blend right into your pocket change, but the right variety, the right condition, or the right error can transform a tired, faded coin into a jackpot find. So picture this. You've held quarters from 1980 in your hands hundreds of times. Maybe spent them at a gas station or slit them into a vending machine. But what if one of those coins, just like this faded 1980 D, was worth not just 25 cents, but the price of a new car, or even a down payment on a house? That's the kind of mind-blowing value hidden in plain sight. And it's what makes the 1980 D Washington quarter one of the most exciting finds a collector can stumble across. Next up, we move to the 1982 P Washington quarter, and this one tells a story that most collectors know well. A story of mistakes, rarity, and shocking value. At first glance, this extremely circulated example looks like nothing special. The surfaces are worn to a flat grey. Washington's face is smoothed down. The eagle's feathers on the reverse are barely visible, and the edges are soft from decades of use. But look closely at the mint mark, the P, from Philadelphia. For many years, Philadelphia coins had no mint mark, but in 1980, the mint began adding one, making this one of the early P quarters. And the 1982 P carries one of the most famous and valuable modern quarter errors of all time. This is the coin that gave rise to the legendary 1982 P Washington quarter with no mint mark. That's right, in a small number of cases, the die that struck these coins was missing the P entirely. creating a coin that looks like it was made in the old pre-1980 tradition. Collectors went wild when this error was discovered, and the value is absolutely jaw-dropping. In circulated condition, one of these 1982 no mint mark quarters can bring in $200 to $500. In higher grades, the numbers explode. Mint state examples have reached over $10,000, and the finest known specimens have sold for more than $30,000 at auction. That's for a single quarter that most people wouldn't give a second look to. Even without the famous no mint mark error, the 1982p is still interesting because it was struck in massive numbers during a period when the mint was producing billions of clad quarters every year. That high-speed production meant plenty of mistakes slipped through. Off-center strikes from 1982p can reach values of $1,000 to $3,000, depending on severity. Double die errors on the obverse and reverse, though rare, can fetch several $1,000s. And then there are dramatic wrong plankett errors. A handful of 1982p quarters struck on dime plankets or foreign blank have been recorded, some selling in the $5,000 to $15,000 range. The best part about the 1982p is that it blends right into circulation. People still spend them without realizing what they're holding. Imagine finding one in this exact same extremely circulated condition, where the surfaces are dull and lifeless, but when you look closer, the mint mark is completely missing. Instead of a worthless worn coin, you're suddenly holding a $500 bill in the palm of your hand. And if lightning strikes twice and you discover a high-grade survivor, you might be looking at the kind of payday that makes national headlines. What makes this coin so thrilling is the emotional twist. It's a coin you've seen thousands of times in your life. You may have used one in a soda machine or tossed one into a jar at home. Yet, hidden among all those ordinary 1982p quarters are a tiny number of spectacular errors worth more than most people's cars. That's the kind of discovery that makes coin collecting F. Next up, we move to the 1983D Washington Quarter, a coin that tells one of the most unexpected stories in modern US coinage. In circulated condition, it doesn't look like much. The coin is worn from decades of use. Washington's profile has lost most of its sharpness. The eagle's wings are flat, and the once shiny surfaces are now dull and grey. The small D mint mark from Denver still peeks out beside Washington's ponytail. But other than that, it looks just like any other quarter you might toss into a vending machine. And yet, the 1983D has shocked collectors with values that are hard to believe. Here's why. In 1982 and 1983, the US Mint did not release official uncirculated mint sets. That means every single surviving coin from those years had to come from circulation. No pristine sets were saved by collectors straight from the mint, which makes finding a high-grade 1983D quarter incredibly difficult. Most examples, like this one, in circulated condition, are heavily worn and face value. But the few survivors in uncirculated gem condition, they're treasures. A sharp, brilliant 1983D Washington quarter has sold at auction for over $10,000. And prices keep climbing as collectors scramble to fill that gap in their sets. But there's more. The 1983D is also famous for dramatic minting errors. One of the most valuable is the double die reverse, where the eagle's wings, feathers, and lettering show doubling. Even in worn condition, a collector will pay hundreds of dollars for a clear example. In high grade, these double die reverses can push past $2,000. And then there are off-center strikes and wrong planchette errors from the Denver Mint in 1983. Quarters struck off-center by more than 50% can bring $3,000 or more, while coins struck on dime or foreign planchettes have stunned the hobby with auction prices as high as $20,000 to $25,000. What makes the 1983D especially exciting is the emotional punch. For most people, this coin is pure nostalgia. It circulated heavily through the 1980s and 1990s, showing up in pockets, laundromats, and vending machines across the country. Countless people spent them without realizing they were holding something that could one day be worth thousands. Imagine handing over a 1983D quarter for a pack of gum, only to discover years later that a pristine example from that same year sold for more than $10,000. That's the kind of gut-punch surprise that makes this coin legendary among collectors. So while this circulated example may look worn and ordinary, the 1983D Washington quarter is anything but. Its rarity in top grades, its error varieties, and its unique place in history make it one of the most valuable and thrilling quarters you could ever find. It's a reminder that sometimes the coins we overlook the most can hide the biggest treasures. Next up, we move to the 1984p Washington quarter. And once again, at first glance, it seems like nothing but an ordinary piece of worn-out change. This extremely circulated example shows heavy wear. Washington's profile is flat. The word Liberty is fading, and the eagle on the back is reduced to soft outlines with almost no detail left in the feathers. The P mint mark from Philadelphia is still there, but most people wouldn't notice it. They'd probably toss it in a parking meter without a second thought. But the truth is, the 1984p quarter is one of those coins that proves just how deceiving appearances can be. Philadelphia quarters from this year are known for errors and varieties that turn average-looking coins into stunning discoveries. One of the most famous is the 1984p double die obverse, where Washington's eye and parts of the motto "In God We Trust" show clear doubling. Even in extremely circulated condition, collectors will pay hundreds of dollars for a strong example. In higher grades, this error has brought prices soaring into the $3,000 to $5,000 range. And then there are off-center strikes. Some from 1984 show dramatic 50% or more off-center designs, leaving parts of the coin blank, and those have sold for several $1,000s. But what really shocks collectors are the rare wrong planket strikes. In 1984, a small number of Philadelphia quarters were struck on plankets intended for other coins, including dimes and even foreign coin blanks. These incredible minting blunders can carry values of $10,000 to $20,000, depending on condition. Imagine holding a beat-up 1984 quarter like this one, only to realize it was struck on the wrong blank. Suddenly, that dull-looking coin is worth more than a stack of $100 bills. The value of regular 1984p quarters in circulated condition isn't much, maybe a few cents above face value. But the thrill lies in spotting the rarities. And here's another reason why the 1984p is so important. Like the 1982 and 1983 quarters, very few were saved in pristine rolls or mint sets. That means gem uncirculated survivors are surprisingly scarce. Top-graded 1984p quarters, without a single scratch or nick, have brought jaw-dropping prices at auction, some crossing the $10,000 mark. What makes this so emotional is how familiar the coin is. Most of us remember using 1984 quarters in daily life, at payphones, arcade machines, or grocery stores. It was the workhorse of the 1980s, a coin people barely noticed. And yet, hiding among those ordinary coins are a few spectacular rarities that can transform 25 cents into thousands of dollars. That's the ultimate wow factor, realizing the change in your pocket from decades ago could now be worth more than a new car. So while this extremely circulated 1984p Washington quarter looks worn and tired, it carries a story of hidden value, collector excitement, and the kind of shocking discoveries that keep people searching every single. People overlook because it seems so ordinary. The 1965 Washington quarter. At first glance, especially in extremely circulated condition, it might look like nothing more than a well-worn piece of pocket change. The surfaces are dull. The once sharp details on Washington's hair and the eagle on the back are faded, and the edges are smooth from decades of use. Most people would toss it aside, thinking it has no value beyond 25 cents. But here's where the surprise comes in. The 1965 quarter marks a turning point in US coin history. This was the first year the mint completely removed silver from quarters, switching instead to a copper-nickel clad composition. Because of that change, collectors hunt these coins carefully, especially for errors made during the transition. Now, in this condition, a 1965 quarter might only be worth a little over face value to most. But imagine finding one of the rare transitional errors, a 1965 quarter. That was accidentally struck on a silver planchet meant for 1964. These errors slip through the cracks at the mint, and they're worth a small fortune today. Even heavily circulated examples of these silver transitional errors can fetch $5,000 to $10,000. If you find one in better condition, the price skyrockets. A high-grade uncirculated transitional 1965 quarter has sold for well over $100,000 at auction, and one pristine example crossed the $150,000 mark. That's right, a single quarter, from the year most people thought silver was gone, suddenly becoming more valuable than a brand new luxury car. The key to spotting one is weight and color. Regular clad 1965 quarters weigh 5.67 grams, but the rare silver planchets weigh about 6.25 grams and have a brighter, whiter tone. Even if your coin is as worn as this one, in extremely circulated condition, it's always worth checking the weight carefully. You never know when you might be holding a piece of minting history that could change your life. This particular circulated example may not scream riches on its own, but it tells the story of a dramatic shift in US coinage. And that story is exactly what gives collectors excitement. What makes it so thrilling is that these rare 1965 quarters are still out there, hidden in old change jars, tucked in drawers, or even resting in pocket change without anyone realizing. Imagine spending a quarter at the grocery store, only to find out years later it could have been worth 6 figures. That's the kind of shock value that keeps collectors hunting, and it's what makes the 1965 quarter such the legendary piece. Next up, we move to the 1966 1985p Washington quarter dollar, a coin that might not catch your eye at first glance. This particular piece is in extremely circulated condition, and the heavy wear is impossible to miss. The details on George Washington's portrait have been smoothed down from years of handling. The once crisp lettering around the edges is now faint, and in some areas it almost blends into the coin's surface. On top of that, the coin shows patches of rust and pitting, the kind of surface damage that comes from being exposed to damp environments or sitting forgotten for years in poor storage conditions. These scars give the coin a rough texture, almost like little craters scattered across its face. Now, some might look at a coin like this and think it's worthless, but collectors know better. The 1985p Washington quarter is part of an interesting era in American coinage. By the mid-1980s, quarters were being struck in huge quantities at the Philadelphia Mint. And the 1985 issue was no exception. With well over 770 million pieces produced, it was a workhorse of the economy, changing hands countless times in everyday transactions. Because of that, most examples from this year show wear, but it's still worth taking a closer look. The Philadelphia Mint in 1985 did not place a moot mark on quarters, so every piece from this mint can be identified simply by its plain design with no letter under "In God We Trust." While mint marks are often a quick way for collectors to separate rarity, Philadelphia strikes from this era are still significant, especially when they have unique features or are preserved in unusually good condition. What makes our heavily worn and rusted example interesting is the contrast. It's a survivor that shows exactly how hard a coin can work in circulation. Collectors often talk about story coins, pieces that tell a tale through their wear, scratches, and corrosion. This 1985p is one of those. Every nick, every pit, and every smoothed-over line is evidence of its journey. It may have been carried in pockets across the country, spent in corner stores, or rattled around in vending machines for decades. Even though it's not pristine, coins like this remind us of the role they played in daily life. Now, when it comes to value, condition is everything. A 1985p in pristine, mint-state condition can bring impressive prices at auction. High-grade examples, especially those graded MS67 or better by professional grading companies, have sold for hundreds and even up into the low thousands. These are rare because so many 1985 quarters entered circulation immediately and were used until they wore down. By contrast, a heavily worn and pitted example like ours might not attract the same dollar value, but it does hold collector interest. Some hobbyists specialize in collecting circulated coins because they see the beauty in wear. Others look for errors, and this is where things get exciting. The 1985p quarter is known to have produced a few error varieties. These include off-center strikes, where the design is misaligned, and double die errors, where the lettering or design elements show a doubled image. These mistakes from the minting process can dramatically increase a coin's value, even if the coin is worn. For example, an off-center 1985p quarter has been documented selling for several $100s, simply because it stood out as a minting mistake. So, even if a coin looks rough, it's always worth checking carefully for errors. Another factor is the historical context. By 1985, quarters were firmly entrenched in their copper-nickel composition, having switched from 90% silver back in 1965. That means coins like this don't have the silver melt value that older quarters do, but they still represent an important chapter in US coinage history. Collectors who focus on building complete sets of Washington quarters need the 1985p, no matter the condition, which ensures there will always be a base level of interest in these coins. So while this extremely circulated, rusted and pitted 1985p Washington quarter dollar might not bring in big money, it still carries value in its story. It's a piece of everyday American history, a survivor of the grind of circulation, and a reminder that sometimes the roughest looking coins can still hold lessons for collectors. And who knows, if you keep your eyes sharp, even a worn coin like this could hide a mint error that turns it from pocket change into a valuable find. Next up, let's talk about the 1989p Washington quarter dollar, a coin that might not seem extraordinary at first glance, but it carries its own share of history and collectible intrigue. By the late 1980s, the Washington quarter had been in circulation for more than half a century, and the US Mint was still striking millions upon millions of these coins for daily use. In 1989 alone, the Philadelphia Mint, which is represented by the P Mint mark, produced over 512 million quarters. That's an enormous number, and it's why most people assume that these coins are common and not worth more than face value. But as with many quarters, condition, strike quality, and unique errors can transform an ordinary 1989p into something collectors are willing to pay real money for. Now, the coin we're focusing on here is in a slightly fine condition, meaning it's fared better than many that have seen decades of circulation. While it's not pristine or mint state, it doesn't suffer from the heavy wear, pitting, or rust-like surface damage that we often see on coins from the 60s, 70s, or even earlier 1980s. Instead, this 1989p still has some detail visible in George Washington's hair and face, and the reverse design featuring the eagle hasn't been completely flattened out by handling. Coins like this can sometimes spark collector interest because they represent a balance. They've survived circulation long enough to show a story, but they're not so worn down that the details have disappeared. One interesting thing about the 1989 quarters is that, despite the massive mintage, high-quality examples are surprisingly tricky to find. Coins that grade MS66 or higher are considered rare, and those that make it to MS67 are the true standouts. Auction records show that pristine examples of the 1989p have sold for hundreds of dollars, with one gem mint specimen fetching around $1,500 in a top-tier grading. That might not seem like millions, but for a coin that most people think that offers pocket change, it's still a shocking number. And here's the key point. Many of those coins came straight from bankrolls, untouched. The ones floating around in circulation today are rarely found in such fine shape. Errors also play a big role in the value of this coin. Collectors are always on the lookout for double die obverses, off-center strikes, broad strikes, and other anomalies. A double die, where the lettering or parts of Washington's portrait appear slightly doubled, can boost the coin's desirability dramatically. Likewise, an off-center strike that cuts into the design, or a coin struck on a defective planket, can turn an ordinary 1989p into a valuable rarity. These kinds of errors are the real hidden gems because they're one-of-a-kind accidents from the mint. The slightly fine condition of this specific 1989p quarter gives us a glimpse into the coin's journey. It's not a pristine roll-fresh example, but it's also not a coin that has been abused to the point of being unattractive. Collectors often appreciate coins like this because they're still affordable for beginners, while seasoned collectors may keep an eye out for unusual details or errors. It's almost like this coin sits in a middle ground, common enough for anyone to own, but with just enough potential that it could surprise you if it carries a hidden error. So, while most people overlook the 1989p as just another quarter from the late 80s, those who know how to look closer understand its possibilities. With over 500 million struck, the majority will always be worth just 25 cents. But if you've got one in fine or better condition, or even better, one with a striking mint error, You could be holding a piece worth far more than pocket change. That's the magic of coin hunting. You never know which everyday coin is going to reveal an extraordinary story. Next up, we have the 1994 D Washington quarter dollar, struck at the Denver Mint. At first glance, this coin might not jump out as anything extraordinary. After all, millions were produced that year, over 880 million to be exact. But as any seasoned collector will tell you, the true value of a coin isn't just about how many were made. It's about survival, condition, rarity and errors, and collector demand. That's where things get really interesting with the 1994 D quarter. This coin was minted during a time when quarters were still heavily used in daily circulation. Debit cards weren't as common. Vending machines were everywhere, and people carried change for payphones, laundromats, and toll booths. So many 1994 D quarters were used hard. They passed through countless hands, often getting scratched, worn, or dinged up along the way. That's why finding one today in truly fine condition is not as easy as it sounds. A coin that managed to avoid excessive wear and still shows most of its original details is a pleasant surprise for collectors. Let's talk about the design. The obverse features George Washington's portrait, first introduced in 1932 and still in use decades later. By 1994, this design had already been a familiar face in American pockets for over 60 years. The Denver Mint mark D is placed just behind Washington's ponytail. On the reverse, you see the classic eagle design, with wings spread proudly, clutching arrows of strength and an olive branch of peace. This reverse was used from 1932 until 1998, making the 1994 D part of the very last stretch of classic Washington quarters before the state quarters took over in 1999. That alone gives it a certain nostalgic value. Now, let's talk about errors and varieties, because this is where collectors really perk up. The 1994 D quarter is known for having a few interesting mistakes. Some coins show die cracks, where tiny raised lines appear across the surface due to breaks in the die. Others have dot of its original details is a pleasant surprise for collectors. Let's talk about the design. The obverse features George Washington's portrait, first introduced in 1932 and still in use decades later. By 1994, this design had already been a familiar face in American pockets for over 60 years. The Denver Mint mark D is placed just behind Washington's ponytail. On the reverse, you see the classic eagle design with wings spread proudly, clutching arrows of strength and an olive branch of peace. This reverse was used from 1932 until 1998, making the 1994 D part of the very last stretch of classic Washington quarters before the state quarters took over in 1999. That alone gives it a certain nostalgic value. Now, let's talk about errors and varieties, because this is where collectors really perk up. The 1994 D quarter is known for having a few interesting mistakes. Some coins show die cracks, where tiny raised lines appear across the surface due to breaks in the die. Others have off-center strikes, where part of the design is missing because the blank wasn't properly aligned in the press. And then there are the rarer clipped plankets, where a small crescent-shaped piece of metal is missing from the coin's edge. These kinds of errors can transform an ordinary 25-cent coin into something worth hundreds of dollars, depending on severity and condition. Even without errors, the condition of a 1994 D quarter matters a lot. In circulated condition, They're usually only worth face value. But in fine or better condition, like the one we're looking at now, there's more appeal for collectors who want a sharp example of this late Eagle reverse era. Move into higher grades, such as mint state, MS65 or higher, and you could be looking at values of $25, $50, or even $100 plus, depending on demand and the quality of the strike. The record for a 1994 D quarter in top-grade mint state sits in the hundreds of dollars, showing that even modern quarters can surprise you at auction. Finally, we have the 1996 P Washington quarter dollar. Now, at first glance, this coin might not seem like much. It's a modern quarter, one most of us have probably handled dozens of times without giving it a second thought. But when you stop and take a closer look, this coin is part of an important transition in US coinage history. And even in a fine or average condition, it can be worth checking closely because of the quirks that came out of its minting year. The Philadelphia Mint produced over 925 million quarters in 1996. So naturally, most of them were released into circulation, used in everyday life, and became heavily worn down over the decades. But despite those high mintages, some quarters stand out because of their condition, their errors, and the collector demand they've gained as we move further away from the 1990s. Think about it this way. 1996 was the last year before the famous 50-state quarters program began in 1999, which completely reshaped US coin collecting. For an entire generation, that makes the 1996 P quarter one of the final regular issue Washington quarters before things changed forever. Looking at this particular coin in fine condition, the wear is evident. George Washington's portrait on the obverse shows softened detail. His hairlines blend into one another, and the cheek area is flatter than what you'd see on a fresh strike. The word liberty is still clear, and in God we trust remains readable. But there's no mistaking that this coin has spent a long time in circulation. On the reverse, the eagle that once had sharp feathers now looks muted, with the wingtips lacking their original definition. The olive branches and arrows it holds in its claws are also less distinct, a common sign of wear on these quarters. But here's the part collectors get excited about. Certain 1996 P quarters have been found with errors and varieties that can make even a well-worn coin far more valuable than face value. For instance, there are repo of double dies, where some of the lettering shows a doubling effect, particularly around the date or the motto. There are also off-center strikes and weak strikes that slipped past quality control, making them highly collectible. Even a dramatic misalignment of the die can send a coin's value soaring if spotted. In terms of price, a heavily circulated 1996 P quarter like this one is usually worth just face value, about 25 cents. But if you find one in uncirculated or mint state condition, the story changes. In mint state 65, these coins can bring $10 to $15. And at higher grades, they've been known to sell for even more. The real jackpot, though, comes with error coins. Some double die or off-center 1996 P quarters have been auctioned for hundreds of dollars, depending on the severity of the error and the condition of the coin. So while this fine condition 1996 P quarter may not make you rich, it's still worth holding on to. It represents the end of an era for the Washington core.